A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 13. 13 episodes. I think that makes it now we've officially done more Star Wars episodes than EAGLEHEART episodes. I am your host.
I think that's right, yeah.
I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hi, sorry, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to talk.
No, it's all right.
Actually answer your question.
We play it loose here. At Talking Birds,
loose and fancy free.
Hey man, we're not like one of those podcasts that inundate you with ads,
yeah,
stuff. We don't have bills to pay. Well, we do have bills to pay, but
we do. But this is not how we pay them.
This is not how we pay them.
This would be a much different podcast if it was.
Really? How would the show be if we had to do it for money?
Oh, I don't know.
You wouldn't be doing it. Is that, or I wouldn't be doing it? I'd find a more professional host.
You'd probably find a more professional co-host. Yeah, that's
not what I said. I meant me.
Oh,
I think I actually referred to myself as the quote jackass of the podcast. Somebody's got to be it.
I don't know that that's strictly true, but if I don't want to. I don't want to negate your self-deprecation. So.
I mean it in an affectionate way toward myself.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean any of our loyal listeners can call me a jackass, because it's okay if I call myself a jackass. So, we got lots of stuff to talk about today.
We should do.
But as a quick diversion, I was thinking about this, because as I'm always doing, I'm always reorganizing and moving stuff around in my house, my modest house, which is modest for Seattle, probably large for other people. But I'm like in this process of I buy a lot of movies, or in the past I've bought a lot of movies. And I've sold them and, gotten rid of, upgraded to Blu-rays, and as things get better. So I end up with a lot of these cases and things, and I've been slowly converting them to like the smallest amount of storage possible. And as I do it, and I get tired, and I think about the concept of, physical media, and is it, am I just so out of touch where it's like, kids today, it's like I don't think they even care about having the disc. It's like if they got Star Wars, it's like they probably watched it on Spike TV, or, maybe they bought the digital copy, or maybe their mom bought them a couple of the movies on DVD or something. And it's like, I always think it's like, is physical media, even with this onslaught of new Star Wars content, it's like, there's comic books coming out, and books and stuff, but all those things can now be read on Kindles and iPads and what have you. It's like I mean, one of the great things about Star Wars is that at least for when I was a kid, it was like you would buy a physical item, you could take it, you could whatever. is, and you could kind of build a collection. Now, I mean, collecting is kind of it's an odd thing because it can, for some people who are like really obsessive about it, like like Steve Sansweet that has Rancho Obi-Wan up there by Sacramento, and he has, it's a business, it's a non-for-profit business, but he started out as an obsessive collector, and then he worked for Lucasfilm, and now he does it on his own. I don't know how well it's self-sustaining because all the stuff he has, it's amazing. But
yeah, I don't know. I mean, they must get people who show up there. And then you also, I saw, just to interject briefly, he's going to be showing up at some of the, like, whenever they release the new line of toys at Toys R Us, he's like going to be at some of those events. So I don't know if he gets an appearance fee for those or what, but yeah, I know. Sorry, I just wanted to interject.
No, that's fine. I guess I don't really know what my point is because it was just something that kind of crossed my mind this morning.
Yeah.
About, the idea of like, well, when I think about how many copies I own of like Star Wars movies, because I was cleaning out a box and I realized I have the 3-pack VHS box set that came out in the early 90s, which is the first time I ever owned those movies because long story, I didn't have a VCR for most of my childhood. So it wasn't a thing I have. And then I had I'm like, oh, I have another. Then I have them in widescreen special edition. So that's when they added all the digital effects the first time. And then I have, then I look and I see over here, I have a box set of the widescreen, pre-special editions. And then I have a couple, of them in slightly different artwork on the box kind of thing, like the original kind of edition. And then it's like I have the Star Wars trilogy, laser discs before they made all the changes. Well, actually, no, that's not true. Now that I'm looking at it, this it is the special edition. For some reason, I always thought that was the ones before they had added changes. No, I guess I do have. I bought the laser discs with the digital things. I don't have a laser disc player anymore. So I'm not. I'm not really bragging in so much as that I'm thinking to myself is the age of like fandom, meaning you have to physically have the item, because it's like I've only bought I bought some Star Wars T-shirts to wear this summer at Target, and then I bought my nieces some of these Hot Wheels have like the ships now, and you can put them on a little clear thing, and then you can put it on your finger and pretend it you can pretend you're flying around with it. And the oldest, Avery, she loved it. The younger, Zoe, got a TIE Fighter and didn't really care for it. She actually left it here when she left. But that's all right. She's 3.
I liked that game.
She's 3. I mean,
yeah. Oh yeah, that's a little young.
But I like the Millennium Falcon so much that Avery, the oldest at 5, I went and bought another one. And I put it on I put it up in my office or whatever inside the pack. I didn't open it up, but it's like just adding that one thing after having said to myself, no more stuff, no more Star Wars stuff. It starts to realize is that, I can make an agreement with myself that I'm going to I want less crap. I want less crap in my house. I don't have to enjoy these. It's like the figures. It's like, I don't need to go out and collect the carded figures and stuff, because I have these great books that you can open up and look at them, and it takes up a fraction of the space. But then part of me, when these movies come out, I'm like, am I going to be buying I'll just buy Captain Phasma. That's all I'll buy. And then I'll say, oh, well, this Kylo Ren looks pretty good. Oh, yeah. They've got, I'm going to get, oh, well, he's got a funny name, or you know what I mean? It's like, it depends on all of a sudden when you go see the movie, it's like, oh, wow, that this character's way cooler. Now I want to have that on my desk. And it's like, obviously I'm not playing with them, but all of a sudden I realize it's like, I look up in the corner of my office and I have a statue of, it was a cheap statue. It was like one of those ones that's made out of plastic of General Grievous. And I was thinking, I was like, what was the thought process that day when I thought that I needed that?
Yeah.
When does it stop?
I don't know. I mean, maybe you should bring in a younger person to talk to about this, because I think I'm pretty similar to you in the sense that, you know, I'm old enough that I grew up in a time where, you know, there was a real value placed on that, you know, physical copy of something, either a book or a DVD or a VHS tape or something. I mean, you know, this is, you know, all right. So I'm clearly a nerd because I have a Star Wars podcast, but the show Mystery Science Theater 3000, you know, a long time ago, this was right before they moved over to the Sci-Fi Channel.
Okay.
They put out a book. It was an episode guide for all of the episodes that they had ever done. And what was great about it was that it was written by the show's writers. And so there were all these like jokes in it and all these great like insights into like how they made the show. And it was great. And I mean, I still have it, but I have worn that thing out. You know, the spine basically, you know, pages are coming out of it because the glue doesn't hold anymore, just because I've spent so much time like flipping through it and looking at it. Whereas now, I mean, if you want an episode guide for a show, you just go online, either to Wikipedia, or if it's something like Star Wars or The Simpsons, or, you know, even some show that doesn't have such a big following, but it has its own like wiki just for that show with, you know, its own episode guide. And so, you just look it up online and it's, you know, a couple sentences just describing what happened in the show, and that's it. And you don't spend the same like amount of time with it, and you don't have the same relationship, I guess, with the thing, which may be fine, right? It's an episode guide for a TV show, right? Like, how much time should I be spending with that thing? And you know, with DVDs, it's a little different. I mean, when I've really sort of made a conscious effort over the last, 5 years or so to kind of cull my DVDs, CDs a little bit less so, but definitely my DVDs, of stuff that like I don't watch anymore, or that I've seen, you know, or something like The Simpsons, where like I've seen those episodes so many times, like I know what happens in those episodes. I don't need to be like, let me watch this episode. I don't really remember what happens. This might be a fun one. Like I can just remember like, this is the episode where this happens. And then I just picture the scene in my head or whatever. So, you know, I went from having like a really tall bookshelf full of DVDs now to a very small bookshelf full of DVDs. And that still feels like like it might be too much to me. Like I look at it and go like, I don't know, like, is this too much? And I don't think it's a matter of like, I'll just, you know, digital media is better or whatever. But it's just a matter of like having all this stuff in my life that ultimately it's just stuff. But at the same time, there are some TV shows or movies that, you know, I'm not going to get rid of. You know, something, I don't know, just because I was watching it earlier today, like Mission Hill, right? Like I still want to keep that DVD around just because I haven't even bothered to look and see how hard it is to find those episodes online, but just there, you know, there's something about the packaging or the way the DVD was put together, you know, that there's still value in having the physical copy because it offers you something. There's some extra thrown in, you know, when they manufacture these DVDs, less so with VHS, but especially with DVDs and Blu-rays, right? They threw something into there. They gave you all these extra features in order to get you to spend $20 or $50 or whatever. Whereas with online, you just get the movie and it's cheap, but you don't get any of that extra stuff with it. And so, you know, maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe it's that you and I are both interested in like process to some extent. So like, yeah, I'll buy right. In this case, it was a gift, but I'll get the, you know, 5-disc Blade Runner set that comes with like a 3-hour long documentary on making the movie and every possible copy of the movie that was ever printed. You know, like, yeah, that's fine. And because even though I'm not going to watch the international version that much, like having that at hand is something that like I get some kind of value from that just being able to like, I'll look and see if the international version is online and then just watch that and be done. Like that experience doesn't offer, I guess. So, I mean, I definitely know where you're coming from. I don't know that I can like explain why. And maybe, like I said, maybe if we talk to someone who is like a decade younger, who either only knows or only cares about digital media and non-physical media, could explain it to us. I don't know. But on the other hand, on the other hand, these comic books, the Star Wars comic books, because I have no real like prior relationship with comic books, and I never was one who like fetishized the act of reading a new comic book for the first time, or you're, encasing it in plastic or whatever. I've been reading those digitally, and it's fine. I like some of them, and I don't like others, and I get a good sense of the artwork and everything. But I also do wonder when I'm reading them, like, all right, am I spending enough time with these? Like, should I be?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not really sure how I should be interacting with them as digital media, because before my few feeble attempts at reading, Spider-Man 2099 or whatever, it was when it was the physical comic books, and it didn't appeal to me, but that's still how my brain sort of expects the experience to be. And so when I read them digitally, like, yeah, I'll read through it, but I do wonder what I'm missing by not reading a physical copy of them.
Yeah, I mean, we could go off on this stuff, then there's the idea of economics and the act of going into a store and interacting and having, support an economy and all that. That's all. Mm-hmm. That's all great. I mean, it's the whole thing where I always have this conversation. It's like, oh, I could just buy this on. I would say like, oh, to my wife, I go, oh, I'm not buying any more CDs, because I read 3 articles and they say that essentially the resolution that you hear on a CD is within 5% tolerance of what it is on iTunes. So really all I'm doing is taking up space. But then within with a couple months of that, then I missed the act of going into a store and and shopping and because it's like, now that there's like, say, Apple Music, it's like there's this, I have the whole access of iTunes now, and I end up listening to the same 5 things because there's no there's no process. I don't feel like I'm learning anything. It's like, I go and I say, oh, I want to listen to the Strapping Field Hands. And I put that on and I listen to that for 10 minutes. And then I go, but I could also be listening to, is Carolina Rainbow, on there. I'm always trying to like mess up iTunes, see if I can find something so obscure it doesn't have. They don't really have any Angry Samoans. So.
Right.
But,
well, and that's the thing, right? When you buy or rent a movie or a comic book or whatever online, I mean, the way it works now is like you just kind of like click a button and your money goes somewhere, and then you have this thing in front of you immediately, right? There's not that it's not the same kind of transaction. And I mean, this is like a huge conversation that people are having all over the place about all kinds of different stuff.
It's like the money that you actually never held in your hand went to another person who will never see it because it's just on a paper. I will say the one thing that I would miss if I got rid of all my comics, and this isn't something that really you could experience having not really been a comic book person, but really for me, comic books, except for like a 2-3 year period where I got into the whole superhero stuff in the late 80s, was really Star Wars. Mm-hmm. And I still have I have a box of all mine, and a lot of them are like the covers are tattered or missing altogether because I bought them out of quarter bins or whatever. They don't look good, and you leave them and they've bled through and stuff like that. The ink, but the smell, which I don't think that's really part of reading comics, though. I think that would be the thing if I decided like I have all this original Star Wars digitally somewhere, and it's like, well, I could easily just clear out a 1 by 12, 1.5 foot by 12 inch space on my shelf by throwing these comics out. But it's like I've never opened up any of those files to look at the comics. Once a year I'll pull out that box and I'll flip through, and I'm missing, I probably only have maybe a third of the actual comics, but it's like, and I'm like, oh, this was a great story. And I don't know. I guess I'm going way off. I will just say that I do feel that, going and looking at the physical thing and kind of taking time to interact with it, it does kind of makes me more critical of what we have now, of like the quality of the stories and things. And I hate to be one of those people. It's like, oh, things were way better when I was a kid, but I don't know, at least for Star Wars comics.
To a certain extent, it becomes that like snake eating its tail, right? Where the media, because it's digital, it becomes, in a sense, more disposable, right? Like, if you delete a file, like, you can always just get it back or whatever. Or, you know, if you can keep it in your Netflix queue and watch it or not watch it and then take it off your Netflix queue and put it back on or whatever. Whereas, you know, a physical thing, like, if you get rid of it, like, you have to, again, go to the store and purchase it again. You know, it's not the same thing. And so, because the digital media is, I mean, disposable isn't quite what I'm trying to get at, but for lack of a term, I'll say disposable, because it's easier to sort of move on from, right? Then the people making them see that and they're like, all right, well, because people consider this more disposable, like, we're not going to put in the same amount of, like, energy, creative energy or whatever into making this thing.
Right.
But then people see that and say, like, well, if they didn't put their energy into making this thing, like, why do I care if, you know, I buy the actual DVD or if I just watch it online or whatever, you know? And then it becomes this perpetuating thing.
Yeah. I guess wait. I guess we should get into the bulk of the show, because I realize I'm about ready to tell the story about how I just read about this. It's an old story about Bruce Willis trying to will his iTunes collection to his kids. Did you hear about this?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No.
I guess he was writing up some will about a year and a half ago, and he went to go with his lawyer, and he wanted to will them his iTunes collection, which I assume is just like 500 Charlie Musselwhite albums. But
it has all of his. Is he which band is he? Is he Rat Dog? No, he's not Rat Dog.
No, this is Bruce Willis, man.
No, but what was the name of his band? It was like something. Oh, wasn't Rat in it?
I don't know.
Or was it just like the Bruce Willis Blues Band or whatever? But anyway, I'm sure his iTunes is full of like. I
thought he just called himself Bruno.
Maybe that's what it. Maybe I'm thinking of Keanu Reeves' old band.
Oh yeah, Dog Star.
Dog Star, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe Bruce Willis's iTunes is just full of his old, like, terrible demos that he wants to bequeath to his children.
It's his extended mix of his Seagram's Golden Wine Cooler rap.
It's all of his vocal tracks with no backing band or anything.
But it's like, I guess his lawyer said you can't will these to your kid because you don't own them. But you're actually, when you buy stuff on iTunes, you actually it's a lease, legally speaking.
Yeah.
That dissolves upon your it dissolves when you dissolve. And
right.
I don't know. I guess once you're gone, it's like, I'm not worried about, like, oh, you know, if I die, I want to make sure that my wife has, you know, the unaltered versions of Star Wars at her fingertips. I don't think she's going to care. Right. But I don't know, when the soundtrack album comes out, it's like, am I going to buy a physical copy, or am I just going to buy it on iTunes? Or am I even going to buy it at all, because I have this for $10 a month? I can just lease these, you know, these songs that I can listen to on my phone. You know, it's like, it's interesting. Mm-hmm. It'll be, you know, I don't know, but let's.
Well, and that's, I mean, so we'll get to Star Wars, because this is actually relevant for some of the stuff we're going to talk about. But I will just say that, I mean, that was the thing with the special edition soundtracks for the original trilogy that came out around the time that they were doing the special edition movies, you know, the 2-disc things. Like, what was great about those was you had all these liner notes that kind of like made all these connections to things. And, you know, even if you weren't necessarily able to pick them up on the first listen, like, you could read those and sort of help make those connections, and it sort of enriched the experience. Then when you got to like the prequel soundtracks, I mean, I think we've touched on just like, they kind of threw those out there. We're like, yeah, here's a CD full of whatever. Here's just all the music used from the movie.
Yeah, it did that one for the Phantom Menace one.
It was episode 2 or 3. I can't remember.
Well, no, the Phantom Menace they call it the Ultimate Edition, and it's just garbage. Mm-hmm. It's like, there's actually like dialogue tags in it, because they didn't go back to the tapes. They just went to the movie and took the sound effects out. But it's
so to answer your question, I guess whether I want to buy the physical soundtrack or just do the digital version, like, I guess it'll depend on how they package it, how they release it, whether they actually whether they actually care about people buying the physical media, or whether they're just like, no, we're just going to put this in the iTunes store and people will download it and whatever.
And that being said, and I remembered before we started, I was like, there's some bit of news came out that I was going to talk about. And this is kind of what spurred it, is that in November, they're releasing the movies again.
Yes.
In Steelbooks, which...
But
what?
Yes. Well, but they're releasing them individually.
Or in a box.
Right. But I think the big draw here is that previously... Right, when George Lucas was running things, he was like, "No, you have to buy all the movies together. Like it's meant to be a saga. You had to buy all 6 movies at once, basically. Or even if I think there was one point in time where you could just buy like the original trilogy or the prequel trilogy together, but you would still have to buy like all 3 movies. And so now I think the big draw is that they're going to be packaged individually at some point.
Yes, and that's it's either going to be a 6-disc Steelbook. I mean, a 9-disc, which is it's a recreation of the original Blu-ray set, or you can buy them individually. Now, I don't know if they come with, they say that there's no added content, so people won't want it. It won't make people that are like completists have to buy it. But then I'm thinking the mere fact that it's Steelbook, which if you ever need to go down a rabbit hole, go into one of like a DVD. Website and talk and like read about dudes that like, and it's all dudes.
Oh sure.
It's all dudes and that collect Steelbooks. Like they go and they order, they pay, 4 times what they would normally pay so they could import like, 6 Days and 7 Nights with Anne Heche and Harrison Ford came out on a Steelbook in Germany. And they only made 500 of them. And that these dudes will buy it. Because it's like, I just buy everything. Yeah. I'm just, my entire collection is Steelbooks. And I don't really understand. One, they're the dumbest thing ever. Because I've bought them. And not because they're Steelbooks. Because sometimes you go to Best Buy and they're, Scarface for $5. And then you take the packaging off and it's already scratched. It's like, well, I'm glad I don't collect these. I have like, the only Steelbook that
that's why it was $5.
The only Steelbook I truly treasure is my, it's a DVD actually of David Lynch's Dune, where it's like one side it's the theatrical version. No, I mean it's just the, it's the theatrical one side and then the extended Alan Smithy version with extras on the back, which is kind of nice. But it was only out there for a short time, but it's like if maybe if they were throwing in those digital copies, it's like. Maybe I'd be tempted because I never bought them. And it's kind of like, although it's more kind of an occupational thing where it's like, if I, like before the show, the night before the show, I always like to throw on something Star Wars-y to kind of like see, maybe I'll notice something that I can talk about. And having to go get those discs, because it's all like 10 feet away from me and I have to load it.
Right.
And then I'm like, oh no, I put in Jedi and I wanted Empire. It'd be nice just to click on it, but I'm not paying $100. I'm not paying $100. I tried that. Yeah. I tried this one time. This is really stupid. Yeah. But I bought the Ridley Scott's Alien and then James Cameron's Aliens on Blu-ray as individuals, even though I already have them, because they had the digital copies. Because I thought, I'll get them and I'll have them on my Apple TV, and that way I can download them to my iPad or whatever easily. Well, it turned out it was ultraviolet only, which still works, but it's a competing format, and so I wrote a very like impassioned letter to Fox Video, asking them like I have bought, when I got a DVD player, the first thing I bought was the 4-disc Alien box. And then 2 years later, when they did the 9-disc set, I bought the 9-disc set. And then when they released it on Blu-ray, I bought it again. And then I bought this. And, could you guys do me a solid and just send me some codes? And they're like, no. Yeah. I'm like, no. Like, jeez. I think there was a time when that worked one time. I got Universal to send me a copy of that.
I feel like in the 80s and 90s, like if you actually sent a company a letter, they would like give you something.
I even
but now I don't think that happens anymore.
I even put in proof that I had bought them. So it was like I took a picture of the codes inside the disc. But if anybody really needs a copy of Ridley Scott's Alien or James Cameron's Aliens, hit me up. I'll make you a deal.
That this is off topic, but that reminds me when I was young and collected like basketball and baseball cards. I would write letters to different teams asking them for like rookie cards of like the best player or whatever. No, I don't even know why I got that idea. Like, I think I read somewhere that like, oh, you could write to the team, then maybe they'll send you some. So I was like, oh, hi, like, hi, Minnesota Timberwolves, like, you're my favorite team, even though they weren't. Like, my favorite player is so-and-so. Could you send me a rookie card? Thank you. And invariably they would say like, oh, thanks for the letter. Here's a photo of our cheerleading squad. And I'd be like, okay, it's not what I wanted, but thanks.
Actually,
so it just like I don't know. I was like 10. I don't know.
I'm glad you shared that because I last week I went to the Lucasfilm frequently asked questions to see if we could get on some kind of press list, to get some free swag or something. And it's like, yeah, they're kind of not very forthcoming about how to get on that list.
Yeah,
they're like, just send us an email with your inquiry. And I guess it's like, oh yeah, hey, I have a podcast with my friend and we do this thing and we're not always particularly kind about Lucasfilm. And
we're excited about some of the movies, at least.
It's like, yeah, can you get us some free stuff?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it works.
Yeah, I don't think it works.
That's like you'll know we're not in the bag. Nobody owns us.
That's right, man. This is the punkest Star Wars podcast you will listen to.
It's like Star Wars and punk, but only cars.
Yeah. So the thing I thought was interesting. Let's get back on topic. So the thing I thought was interesting about these Blu-rays is that it was the artwork for each of or at least the covers for each of the 6 discs. So you have episode 1. So they're all like not quite portraits, but they're just like one face of an important character from those movies. So episode 1 is Darth Maul. Episode 2 is Yoda. Episode 3 is General Grievous. Episode 4 is Darth Vader. Episode 5 is an anonymous stormtrooper, and then episode 6 is the Emperor. And I thought those were kind of interesting choices because with the exception of Yoda, like they're all, Sith, dark side, the Empire, they're the bad guys. And Yoda kind of sticks out like a sore thumb in that sense. And so I wonder if they just either didn't know who to put on the cover for episode 2 or, they're like, well, people love Yoda, so we'll find one to put Yoda on and we'll just put Yoda on that one.
Yeah, that's funny because it kind of puts me in mind of the special edition trilogy release when it was wasn't Yoda on Jedi and then Vader was on Star Wars and a Stormtrooper was on Empire. I think that was.
It might have. Yeah, I can't remember if those are the special editions or if it might. I mean, it might be, but I think they also did that for. When they re-released them on VHS right before the special editions because they had upgraded the sound, so it was like the THX version. And I know they did them for those. They might have also done those for the special editions.
I think you're right, and I'm holding this.
Because I have a very clear memory of that Stormtrooper on the cover of the Empire Strikes Back VHS.
So I have the box set of the Star Wars trilogy THX widescreen. Oh, and here it is. So Star Wars is Vader with a TIE fighter and an X-Wing. Empire Strikes Back is the Stormtrooper with the AT-ATs shooting the rebels. Return of the Jedi is Yoda with Luke and Vader and the Emperor in the bottom. That's, kind of, that's what it put me in mind of.
Yeah. So, I was thinking about this and right, because I was thinking, well, these are kind of odd choices, and I wonder, you don't get Luke, which I thought was odd, and you don't get Leia. You don't get any of the heroes really, except for Yoda in episode 2, and that, and like I said, that's like the outlier. So I was thinking about this, Robert. Who would you put on the cover of each of these episode discs?
Let me see.
If you're not prepared, I can.
Episode 1.
Yeah.
Captain Panaka. AKA
C.O. Bibble. You're not going to go C.O. Bibble.
No. Oliver Ford Davies. No, that guy. I just saw that guy get burned to death on Game of Thrones 2 seasons ago. No, Captain Panaka, who is my favorite because he's literally like, one, he was in Highlander. He played the guy that seemed to be obsessed with being a samurai, and he gets drunk with Connor McLeod. But also, he's also the most negative character in the entire Star Wars saga. If you go back, go get your Episode 1 DVD. I know you people all have them, and every line he says is something is a negative. He's
like, you don't really think this is going to work, do you?
Yeah, he's basically what Tom Cruise would call a suppressive person. And he's so negative that like you're just like you can totally tell that he was like when he got out of the theater and they called him up and like, hello, so and so from Lucasfilm, we'd like to hire you for Episode 2. And you're like, fuck you. I'd rather not work. Okay.
All right. So Captain Panaka
episode 2. Maybe that weird guy who owns the diner. Or maybe his wife, the blonde girl who was supposed to be his wife, but at the last minute, like George Lucas replaced her with a robot, with like a sassy robot.
It's an important scene in the movie. Because
I remember all this
character absolutely deserves to be on the cover.
There's all this, yeah. And then Episode 3 would be like just like the babies, the animatronic babies.
Yeah.
Star Wars.
You're not going to have Natalie Portman going, hold me like you did on Naboo.
Naboo. Hey, Naboo. Then, like, Episode 4 be Werher, the bartender at
of course.
Mos Eisley Cantina.
That's your favorite character.
Episode 5, 2-1B. Because he does all the heavy lifting.
Yeah,
he does all the heavy lifting. How many times does that guy save Luke's ass? And then he's like, even when like he basically helps Luke pack when he leaves too. Yeah, he's like helping with the logistics of the base.
Mm-hmm.
Luke is more like wasteful. He just wants to leave stuff.
What will happen with the medical droid?
Exactly. And then let me see, Return of the Jedi. I would say Billy D.
Yeah,
with his mask thingy.
Yeah, that's so great. I love that helmet so much.
Exactly. Which I forget was I just read recently where that came from. It's like an inverted mitt or something, or a salad.
Yeah, it looks like
a salad bowl or something.
Yeah,
that's my.
You could tell.
That's my not my quadrillion. That's my saga. That's what they call it. They call it the saga.
Yeah. See what I like is you get all of the important locations on there, right? You've got Panaka, so we got Naboo represented on there, and we got Coruscant represented on there with the wife. The I can't even remember his name, like Rocky or something.
I don't even know. I hate that.
His
scene.
wife.
I hate that scene.
Right.
Hey,
old buddy,
old pal. I wish the robot had said something really horrible, like that they couldn't take back, like "kiss my grits." And then there's like, then he goes, "You want some Jawa juice?" Like, where is this juice coming from?
Yeah.
Why are they juicing Jawas?
Jawa
or is it
juice.
Or they call it Jawa juice because the Jawas like it? Because obviously on Tatooine, which we'll learn from the Obi-Wan comic if we get there today, is that they have very particular tastes when it comes to beverages.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so I think that's a great 6. Mine are much more conventional.
Okay.
Because I did this like this morning and I wasn't thinking of jokes. But because the news, we only got this news this morning, so and I had to go to a meeting.
Hot take.
Right, so I think Darth Maul is a perfectly fine choice for Episode 1. Right, he's like the most recognizable character from that movie, or at least He's the most recognizable character from that movie that won't make people like destroy their copies of it, like Jar Jar Binks might. Like, if they put Jar Jar Binks on the cover of episode 1, people might buy it just to make YouTube videos or even vines of them destroying it. You know. Episode 2, I was thinking about this. I probably would go with the Clone Trooper because those are so recognizable from the Clone Wars show, and those have become like a really popular image, I think, among fans. I could also see maybe doing Jango Fett there because he, you know, that's the only movie where he does anything really. And, you know, it would tie into that same thing. Episode 3, I would probably go with the Emperor because that's where he becomes the Emperor. You could make a same argument for Vader that's where he becomes Vader. So you put that helmet on there and that's, you know, the Revenge of the Sith or whatever. Episode 4, I would probably put Obi-Wan on the cover of that just because, again, that's, you know, after that movie, he's a Force ghost, and you know, but in that movie, he's really the one who sort of sets a lot of it in motion, or keeps everyone together, keeps the story moving. So you get a chance to show off Obi-Wan there. Episode 5, I would probably put Yoda on that one, and then episode 6, I would go with Luke. You know, on the Death Star, you know, with his like all black and, you know, his green lightsaber or whatever. And that way too, you could set it up so that episodes 1, 2, and 3 all have bad guys on them. You know, Darth Maul, clone troopers who are good guys in that movie, but in the broader overall story, they're part of the, you know, treachery or whatever. So you would have Darth Maul, a clone trooper, and then like the Emperor or Darth Vader, and then the original trilogy is like the good guys coming back. So you have Obi-Wan, an older Obi-Wan, and then you have an older Yoda, and then Luke, who is sort of the product of their efforts. So it puts it, you get like kind of a storyline moving through the images on the discs, on the packaging, and not just in the movies. So that was sort of like my serious take. But yeah, I really did agonize. I was like, God, I really want to put Lando on episode 5, but I didn't think I could justify putting Lando, you know, just Billy D in his Cloud City administrator uniform with his cape and his little gun. And
see, that's the
like, I just didn't think I could justify that.
That's the kind of thinking that has kind of put Lando in the back seat.
I know.
People are like, I don't know, man. Lando's kind of like, if somebody doesn't stand up for Lando, he'll end up being, you know, he'll be like.
Well, so maybe you could put an image. You know, you could do like a clear plastic Blu-ray tray where you pop them out, and then someone else's face is underneath that, smiling out at you, and it could be Lando Calrissian, and who might you be?
No, it just makes that sound that how you doing, you old pirate? It's like, what? It's not like, which is basically goes back into my physical media argument. So it's like at 2:00 in the morning, it's like, I think I'm gonna watch Empire, and all of a sudden you hear this. I'm like, go to bed, Robert. Star Wars will be there in the morning. I'm a grown man. I can watch what I want when I want.
That'd be great. I mean, that technology is like at least 20 years old by this point, maybe even 30 years old. Yeah, you know, you open the gift card and music starts playing or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you can go right now
easily
Target and buy like a R2-D2 backpack that makes the sound, and also has like a thermos bag, which I had to resist the urge. It's like, when do I take my lunch places? Why do I need a thermos bag? I have a thermos bag, and it's got Darth Maul on the front, and I've had it around so long, it's actually become where I store this microphone when I'm not using it.
Yeah. I mean, you could also, I guess, it'd probably be with Darth Maul. When you open it, you can make the eyes flash, and then I don't know if you remember. Again, this has to be like 25 years ago. But if you went to like the Nature Company, or you know, one of those stores where they have this like little cicada keychain, and when you pressed it, it made the eyes blinked red, and it made this obnoxious noise, and it was like. Right? So you can do that every time you open your episode 1 DVD, again, at like 12:30 in the morning.
It'll do that. Or have Captain Panaka going, it's too dangerous. The Hutts are gangsters. We're not going to make it. The Eeyore of the Star Wars universe.
Yeah. Yeah. So this question of physical versus digital media, of course, also ties into probably the biggest story from the last 7 days since we recorded the last show, which is this rumor that not 1, not 2, but 3 live-action Star Wars shows are currently in development to air on Netflix. And it's a rumor, so who knows? The logic of this would be that, Disney already has a working relationship with Netflix through Marvel and Daredevil. And apparently there's some other upcoming Marvel-based shows that are going to air on Netflix. Specifically to Star Wars, they released the sort of season 6 of Clone Wars to Netflix. So
yeah, exclusively for like almost
exclusively to Netflix,
like 6 months before they released it.
Yeah,
on video.
So the logic is there where people could say like, okay, well this would make sense for them to do it that way, but we don't really have anything more concrete than that. And I guess, the biggest question is, we've talked about this a couple times. They've tried to make a live action show before, and the production costs were just too high for them to really make it feasible. So how do they make, possibly as many as 3 live action Star Wars shows and keep the production costs that plague Underworld to, a reasonable level?
Yeah. Why don't they just, I don't really understand TV production, but I don't see the simple economics of like, well, if we're having trouble making 1, let's make 3,
Right. And maybe enough time has passed that, as time goes on, a lot of the different production methods become cheaper to make, the materials can become cheaper or whatever else. Even something like Farscape, which eventually was canceled in part because of production costs, but they still got, 4 seasons out of that. No one says that these Star Wars shows have to be on for 25 years or whatever. They can 3 or 4 seasons is probably fine. So Farscape was able to get by for that long, and if you watch that show closely enough, like you can see like, okay, this is clearly that other set that they just redressed because they didn't want to spend money on building a whole new set, so they just put they covered it up with like a drop cloth and painted everything a different color, and
yeah.
So now they're pretending it's like a weird new location, but really it's just that same room of the ship that they've been using forever. But now they put spider webs everywhere or something.
Right. And that's pretty much a time-honored tradition for sci-fi movies.
Right.
Sci-fi television. That's Battlestar Galactica, the Lorne Green one. It was canceled because of production costs. And then Glenn Larson was able to flip most of the sets over for when he did Buck Rogers with Gil Gerard, which a lot of the animations were kind of pilfered from that. I would kind of hope that in 2015 or 2016, whenever they would have a better method of doing that. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the big things is like immediately when someone says, "Oh, they want to do 3 live action," I even shudder at the thought of 1 live action. I'm just starting to warm up to Rebels, and then for them to throw in the mix of this live action, you get this situation where it's, whenever that hard sell that ABC and Marvel did for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And that, just how bad it was. A lot of people have said, oh, it's gotten a lot better. You should really go back and see it. It's gotten, the second season improved. And it's definitely a show I just have never gone back. And, people say that The Flash is really good, that's DC, of course. But,
right.
But it's one of those situations where it's something that it's possible. I liked at the end of it, all in all said, I thought that Daredevil season 1 was good, even though that there was there's a lot of dragging slowness in in the show. And it's just one of those things where if they did it right and they did like, say Star Wars, the Bounty Hunter Wars in an 8-episode thing where it's like, like True Detective, where it's like,
right.
It's cinematic, has a finite point, and it ends. Like, I would be more interested in that than having to be like season 1 and
sort of like an anthology show.
Yeah, it's when you have to adhere to the concept of seasonal episodic television, you run into these things where it's like, well, we committed to 13 episodes, so episode 11 is or episode 10 will be a bottle episode where it'll all be told from the bridge of the Tantive 4. Where like, hey, remember that time in episode 2 when we almost didn't get out of the, that kind of.
Yeah.
Like when you.
I guess, lots of shows do that kind of thing too.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's the, I'll just say, like, I said something, like my wife was watching something and I go, oh, is this a bottle episode? And she's like, what's that mean? And then I explained it. And then she goes up on Wikipedia because she doesn't believe anything I say. And it was almost word for word. I was like, oh my God, did you write this Wikipedia entry? I'm like, no, it's literally they call it that because
that's the definition.
It's the episode. Well, it kind of came into its modern parlance from like, it'd be the hologram episode or whatever on, actually, I don't know. It'd be the episode, Star Trek episode where they get trapped in an elevator or something. It's just
right. I mean, and I even remember, like, the one that I always think about is I Spy, a TV show where, it was filmed throughout different parts of Asia. And so, you would have one episode with just these like amazing backgrounds of like Hong Kong or, Mount Fuji, something in the background, and you're like, wow, and they're running around all these locations. And then the next episode, it's just like 3 people sitting in a room talking about being spies for 20 minutes. And like this, they never leave the living room of their, apartment or whatever. And it's because they had to save money because they spent all that money on the other one. And so now they have to like make that up somehow. And so, I mean, even if they didn't do like flashbacks or whatever, I guess they could, that would be one way of, let's all talk about what, being a bounty hunter means to us. And then that's the episode.
Yeah. I mean,
it's,
Star Wars is like one of those things that any kind of whiff of like being budget conscious, which, you could say like, well, some of the special effects in the prequels were budget conscious, but all in all, I don't think so. But they were the best they could make at the time in the time frame they had. Mm-hmm. But if you start to go like, well, we'll cheap out this week, and then all of a sudden it starts to look like the holiday special,
Right.
It's like, well, I mean, it's not gonna look as bad as that, but it gets that kind of thing, which I guess is now canon according to J.J. Abrams.
Yeah, I mean, he's not part of the Lucas story group, so I would want to hear what Pablo Hidalgo says before I
exactly.
But I mean, the other interesting thing about, and this is, I mean, they're going to have to tread carefully if they're really going ahead with 3 shows, is what time frame do you set these shows in? Because they're not, with the new comics, they're not really venturing outside of the original trilogy era. I mean, the Kanan comic is set earlier, but that's sort of Clone Wars, and it eventually it ties back into Rebels, which is original trilogy, and even if I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, they can't go too far and set something too far before or too far after the original trilogy, because then you lose a big chunk of whatever casual audience you're trying to pick up. And maybe they don't care about that. Maybe they're going to say like, well, there are enough, Star Wars fans, quote unquote Star Wars fans, who would check out this show, that it can, we're just on Netflix. We don't have to worry about, ad revenue on being on NBC or whatever. So, we'll just make a show that the Star Wars, quote unquote Star Wars fans will like, or that they won't be put off by, and go from there. But I would think on some level they would want, to pick up some of that sort of word of mouth Or something like Daredevil, where, you know, people who maybe didn't really care about superhero Marvel, you know, comics or whatever, but they heard, oh, Daredevil's a good show, maybe I should check it out. Right? If they set these Star Wars shows, you know, in the prequel era, they run the risk of, you know, a casual fan hearing like, oh, this show's pretty good, but no, it takes place at the same time the prequels. The prequels were bad, so how good can this show be?
Right.
Or, oh, this show takes place 200 years before any of the movies, so why is this even a Star Wars show? Why don't they just make a show that takes place in outer space and they don't have to call it Star Wars? They're just calling it Star Wars to make money. Or, you know, same thing if they set something, you know, 100 years after the original trilogy. They'd be like, well, why don't they just make a science fiction show and they don't have to call it? So, I mean, I think they're going to have to really spend a lot of time finessing what these shows are going to be, what kind of stories they're going to tell. And when, you know, but then on the other hand, if they set all three of them, if they say like, all right, you know what, we want to make sure we hook casual fans who like remember that the original trilogy was good. So we're going to make all three of these shows set in the original trilogy era. Well, then you have 3 TV shows, 3 movies, 5 comic books now that are canon, some novels that all take place in the same time span, like not even counting all the old EU stuff, but just the new canon stuff. You have so much material, so much product like fighting for space in the timeline that they're all going to bump up against each other real quick, and they're going to run it. They might run into this consistency and these canon problems again.
And then
again, they have the story group. I mean, the story group needs to earn its money somehow, and I guess this will be, you know, managing that. All the different storylines. I
just don't see how it could work. It's like, you know, I think about, you know, Sci-Fi did Battlestar Galactica, the Ronald D. Moore reboot that was, you know, critically heralded. It had a couple weak parts of seasons, but generally it did pretty well, and it got out while the going was still good. It had a satisfying ending. People weren't like pissed like Lost. And then it turned around and they did a prequel called Caprica that didn't even last a season. Because they kind of overstretched. They're like, oh, you know, you like all that heavy kind of philosophical stuff that was in Battlestar Galactica? Well, here's a show that's just that. And they had kind of like they'd misjudged their audience, and then they tried to do another backdoor prequel episode that was going to be more action based, and that never made it past the pilot stage, because by that time they'd already kind of used up their goodwill, and you know, there's always a finite, even with Star Wars. It's like Star Wars needs to hibernate sometimes,
right?
Where it's like, you know, the hibernation is definitely a lot smaller in scope than in other ones, because the Clone Wars came up, you know, Star Wars there hadn't been a movie in 7 years or something like that, or maybe even less. Maybe it'd only been like 5 years, but it needs some time to rest, because I think it's when you create a whole world like people go like, oh, you know, it should be like Star Trek. Well, Star Trek and Star Wars are two different animals. They deal, you know, then we have a Star Wars where it's like you constantly have to, you know, let's say there's 3, let's say they do like 3 13 episode shows. That's, you know, 39 hours of programming. And then you have to, you know, eventually you're going to have to explain, you know, relationships and, you know, mores and things. And then all of a sudden now they have to create things that Star Wars is not necessarily has a great track record. You know, it's like, well, you know, basically in Star Wars, love is very chaste. There's not a lot of overt sexuality, and it could get boring really fast. I mean, Star Trek, you know, basically Star Trek dealt with it just by having, you know, Kirk sleep with a different lady every week. And then, you know,
sexy space.
And then later Riker was just, you know, he was like, they actually had a horn dog planet that people would go to, but it can be done. But but Star Trek always had a lot of philosophical, like we have the prime directive, we have to stick to this. And if they're going to eschew the idea of like having Jedi in stuff, then it's like, then the whole philosophical angle of it, I don't know. It's one of these things.
I mean, I was thinking about, I would think at least one of those shows would have to have Jedi in it.
Yeah.
Right? Because otherwise everyone's just like, why are these, again, and why are these even Star Wars shows? Like, if you're not even going to bother to put Jedi in them. So I would think at least one of them would. I mean, they could do a bounty hunter show, and they could do, I don't know. They could manufacture some kind of another sort of Clone Wars show, but not about like the military, but about, the ordinary citizens or whatever. Or they, same thing about during the rebellion, the original trilogy era, like what was day-to-day life for people who is sort of like what they're doing with Rebels now, I guess, but just live action. But again, like then that bumps up against Rebels and the movies and Clone Wars and what, all these other things that they're just beginning to forge these connections between them. And so I would think they wouldn't want to make it too messy too quick if they said like, well, we're going to sweep away all these old stuff and start fresh. And now if they're already going to have to be like, well, you see, what you have to remember is that the reason this person didn't know about the thing happening in that other show is because it's a big universe. And that's why in this comic, this person hires Boba Fett, but then on this thing, Boba Fett is also doing this other bit, They run. I think that's a real risk for them at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the long and short of it, I'm calling for less Star Wars TV shows because it's just like, I mean, I think about when you think your idea is that there's a Clone Wars episode that I keep in my head, and I can't remember the whole point of it. But have you watched pretty much all that?
I watched bits and pieces of the Clone Wars.
So there was an episode where they discover that a clone had been, like, he got injured and he lost his memory, and he was working as in a cafe or something.
Oh yeah,
and that,
I did see.
To
that
me,
one.
That's like, if you go back, I can't remember the name of it. It's basically everything that's wrong with expanding the Star Wars story beyond the movies, because basically this guy, this clone warrior clone trooper had lost his memory, and somebody manipulated him basically to making him a manservant at a place. And this guy shows up with, I forget who it is. Is it the droids? I think it's the droid trilogy.
I don't know. I don't think I made it all the way through that.
Basically, this guy kind of this officer in the Republic Army discovers, oh, this guy's a clone. You're a clone. You have all these brothers. You have this duty to the Republic, and they help him regain his memory. And then, like 5 minutes later, he sacrifices himself for these guys to escape, and he dies. And it's like this whole idea where it's like, I understand that whoever was telling that story is trying to talk about, the greater good and blah, blah, blah. And, and I'm not diminishing the concept of a person sacrificing themselves for a greater good. What I'm saying is how cavalier they treated that concept in Star Wars, because Star Wars is not deep. It doesn't have an emotional resonance. It's like the idea where it's like, I don't need all's quiet on the Western Front, which I think I've already said this before, all quiet on the Western Front type idea with Star Wars. Like, oh, we're all, it's the Battle of the Somme, but with clone troopers. It's like, they don't need to make those analogs so deep. And I feel like if they have to run 3 TV shows, that eventually they're going to start touching on these archetype stories of the idea of like, I'm sacrificing myself for the Republic. I mean, even the hard, kind of harping on this story again, this clone story. It's the idea that, this guy had a life, and he sacrificed himself for basically a war that was a fake war, Right. And at the end, this guy is like, he sacrificed himself for all of us. Yep, like, well, no, not really. You guys are just, this war is a whole pawn of the government. So really, his death meant nothing, and you ran him straight to it. It's like, And see, when I start seeing, when they try to attempt depth in Star Wars, and they go away from that Joseph Campbell archetype thing, the stories that have, the stories that have been with us since the time of Homer or whatever. I mean, I don't think the Iliad has a lot of deep emotional motivation in it. The Odyssey, it's like, it's just, I want to get home. I want to get back to my family. It's not like,
right.
I don't know. It's,
yeah. I mean, so the three what are they called? Republic Commando novels. Is that what they're? Yeah. Cause then the four Republic Commando novels. Yeah. The Karen Travis novels.
Yeah.
I like those, but they are very much what you're talking about. Like because I'm in the middle of reading them now, and I was thinking about this. Like they're very much more like a big long Russian novel than they are like a Star Wars-y kind of thing. Where even right. So there are these like clone troopers, and it's during the Clone Wars. The first book has some action sequences, but by the time you get to like the third one, this like thing that, they're leading up and they're going to go on this mission, whatever. And then it's over in like a page or two. But then, later on in the rest of the book, you get pages and pages and pages of everyone, like every different character, like remembering what happened and thinking about what it means for them and what it means philosophically for them to be clones. And, it's all this, sort of, how we treat our military in a general sense, but then with the added layer of like, okay, these are clones and they don't have any like rights or benefits, and they didn't ask to be, they didn't volunteer for this or anything like that. I mean, so I like them, but Karen Travis could do that because she had like 4 novels of these things, and they're pretty long too, with which to explore all these issues. Whereas if you have a TV show that, every episode has to wrap up in 22 minutes, or or maybe 42 minutes. Right. You can't treat the same issues with the same kind of like care and depth that they need. And so you get a lot of what you're talking about, like with that Clone Wars episode where, it's in the span of 5 minutes that he goes from doing this one thing to now like sacrificing every, you don't build the same philosophical connection with it.
And I think Karen Travis is a good writer, and she those books had a lot of depth to them, and I think that therein lies the seeds of why she no longer works for Lucasfilm, because she would get invested in emotional investment in a franchise. God, I hate saying the word franchise, but that's really the best way to
shared universe.
Shared universe that does not do well when it's with depth, and it's like this kind of idea that and I think that's where I'm paraphrasing a lot of controversy when she quit writing for Lucasfilm, but I think a lot of it kind of came down to the fact she got very protective of the characters, and they were like, hey, ease off on the metaphor and the depth and stuff like that, and she got mad.
And I think it was also like they were taking the whole shared universe in another direction, and so I think some of what she had written was going to be contradicted a little bit, and so she was like, what the hell, I spent all this time writing these books for you people, and you're not
those people are not,
you're not going to honor that.
Writers who write those books, it's like they're kind of like the untold heroes of the book racks, because they do not get paid well. Sometimes those books, like for the months and months it takes, you get paid $3,000 or something like that. Mm-hmm. But
yeah, and it's funny. I read a relatively recent interview with her, and she has this attitude of like, no, I'm writing these for money, right? She sits down every day, like this is her job. She just writes these books for money and whatever else, and which is I wonder if that's an attitude that she adopted based on her experience with these Star Wars novels, where maybe she did get a little more. I mean, and they do get repetitive because they're so long, and like every single character is like thinking about the same topic, and a lot of them they end up coming to the same conclusions or whatever, and they just kind of repeat what other characters are thinking. But so I don't know that she was like spending all of the time in the world developing these characters or whatever. But she did spend a lot of time writing these things and developing Mandalorian culture and language and tying in all of these different themes of, philosophical, but then, stuff about like fatherhood and, all of these very, like I said, it ends up reading more like a Russian novel than Star Wars. And so I wonder if that experience soured her on getting emotionally invested in these things. So now she's just like, yeah, no, I just write these books for money. It's fine. Right. She has her own sort of original novels that she writes, but the shared universe stuff, she's like, no, I'm just a contractor. They just hire me and I write them for money.
I think you're probably right. I think that's, I think she got invested and boom.
Yeah. So I guess we can move on. I think we've thoroughly explored that topic. We got some casting news this week as well. Or we got casting news, but then other sort of general news about The Force Awakens. First is that Jessica Henwick and Miltos Yerolemu, who are both on Game of Thrones, are going to be in The Force Awakens. And it sounds, at least in his case, it sounds like it's probably going to be a relatively small role. But I did think it was interesting that the Force Awakens cast and the Game of Thrones cast there's more and more overlap. The Venn diagram with the middle overlap section is getting more and more populated. And especially now, also apparently Max von Sydow is going to be on Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I saw that.
So which we still have no idea who his character is going to be in Force Awakens, which is making me think that maybe it's really significant, like a really big significant part. But right, so those three now, I guess, and then Gwendolyn Christie, of course. Right. So, and I don't know if that's just they were looking for British people and, these are just working actors who went out for a gig, or if, there's something about the kind of acting that you need on Game of Thrones where they're like, no, those are the kind of actors we want. Let's bring them in.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. The whole, there's a writer, he writes for, Birth Movies Death. His name's Phil Nobile Jr. And he came out with a kind of a diagram trying to guess, Max von Sydow either plays a good guy, a bad guy, or a father, I think is the thing. I can't remember what he actually, I can't remember what his resolution was to whether he thought he was going to be a good guy, a bad guy, or a father in this movie.
Yeah.
I don't know. The Game of Thrones things, I think that's a lot of... I really don't understand how casting works. It does kind of seem like when you're hot, and when you're not, you're not. Like when you...
Right.
Like when you're watching like some local TV commercial and then you see some girl, like, I got my eyeglasses for $9.95. And then like 2 weeks later you say, I can't believe how much chicken's in this sandwich. And you're like, wait, it feels like in entertainment that people tend to get casted in a lot of things really fast. And it's like it's like all of a sudden it's like, some comedian will show up in something and it's just like, why is he in everything? And then you won't see him in anything. I think it might be one of those kind of scenario. I assume that, J.J. Abrams or whatever is probably watches Game of Thrones like everybody else. And
yeah,
and
casting directors too, right? They try to keep.
And that Milos guy, he was only on season 1 of Game of Thrones and had a pretty small role. He did. He was a sword fighter, not to any great extent. He was like a sword fighting instructor. So maybe that might have maybe his background.
Interesting.
Is it Henning?
Jessica Henwick.
Henwick,
I think.
I think she is part of her, and she's got like. I think there's 3 sisters. They call them the Sand Snakes. They kind of were compared to what people said about the book, they were kind of criminally underused this season, but they're kind of, I think they're going to definitely come into play again on Game of Thrones. So I don't think it's a situation where she's signing on for some huge thing.
Right. Like I don't think we'll be. I mean, maybe we will, but it's not a guarantee that like these are people we're going to be seeing in episodes 8 and 9 as well.
Right.
Right. I think it's like, oh, here's a rebel pilot, or here is another.
Yeah, it's
stormtrooper.
Is it Ken Long? I forget how he pronounces it.
Ken Long.
He was in, I remember him from Lost. I really liked him a lot. I mean, he worked with JJ before, obviously, even though I think at that point, JJ Abrams wasn't directly involved in Lost. But,
so he's going to be an officer in the Resistance or Rebellion or whatever it's called.
I like him, but I'm not going to get my hopes up because at this late stage in the game, it's like, it sounds like it might be it's like one of those Grunberg things, like, because I was just watching Mission Impossible 3, and which J.J. Abrams directed, and Grunberg shows up briefly as I think he's the good luck charm. I mean, I think that's J.J. puts him in.
Well, and from what I've read, Ken Lung is sort of like the Greg Grunberg to Brett Ratner's J.J. Abrams, right? Like he shows up in like a bunch of Ratner movies and in sort of like a similar role.
Brett Ratner. That's a name I've not heard in a long time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I mean, it's right. Casting. We're getting down into like, oh, here's who's playing relatively minor roles now. So I haven't seen Game of Thrones, but I guess if you've seen the show and know these people, you can be like, oh, great, Jessica Henwick's going to be in this thing.
Yeah, it always makes me think. I always think about.
I was glad to hear that we got another woman. I was like, oh, thank God, they're casting another woman.
Yeah, it's it's like when you watch Game of Thrones and then anticipating the Star Wars thing. It's like you're like, oh man, it'd be so cool if they could have some kind of Star Wars kind of not a crossover. Don't get me wrong, but like some kind of medieval element, aesthetic, which I think the first thing when I saw the Kylo Ren, hilted lightsaber thing, I thought, oh, it's the Game of Thronesing of Star Wars. It's like he's in the snow with the trees, and it looks very, a lot of Game of Thrones takes place in a snowy area, and there's a lot of like sword claymores, which is that's the sword that the Kylo Ren sword kind of looks like.
Yeah,
I just wonder if it might be just a little bit of like them trying to hedge their bets, or they're giving us that Star Wars. They're trying to give us that classic experience with an eye on the tastes of now. It's like we need a little bit. We need to kind of touch. We need to go into everybody watches Game of Thrones. It's like somehow if this movie was made like 3 or 4 years ago, they would try. They'd probably be casting a bunch of people from Breaking Bad,
Yeah. Right.
God, I hope. I just quick digression. I really hope that what's his face does not end up in a Star Wars movie.
Aaron Paul.
Yeah. I am.
Yeah.
Not,
I'm watching BoJack Horseman now, which he is in, and he's like an executive producer on, which is how I figured out like, oh, that's why he's on the show so much, is because he has an EP credit. And like, he's fine. I mean, it's just voice acting, right? But it's not, I'm not getting to see his whole performance, but it's like he's fine.
But that's the thing.
He's not someone who I would dream of being like the young Han Solo.
Does he play kind of play a skeevy dude in BoJack Horseman?
A little bit. We're just like a lazy.
That's all he does. I mean, that's his. He was in Mission Impossible 3. He plays Tom Cruise's brother-in-law. So it's like I got this double punch because I put it in my mind because I was like, oh, they were giving him away free on on Ultraviolet or something. If you went to the Paramount website, I got like the first 4 Mission Impossible. So I'm watching them this weekend, and I'm like, oh, Greg Grunberg shows up. It's his, and then I'm like, oh, Aaron Paul. It's like, so they have a relationship. It's like, does this mean that they've worked together before? So no, he will show up in Star Wars, and he plays a skeevy brother-in-law, and you're just like, oh, he's a one-note actor. He sticks out like a sore thumb in everything he does. I know I'm being very nasty on a podcast to somebody I've never met, so take that with a grain of salt. But I'm not as, he was great as Jesse because he was playing, his character basically had like 2 notes. It was either like, yeah, bitch, or I don't know what to do. It was that 2 thing. It was either, he was either high and having a great time, or he was snotty and crying. And that was like, he was not the best part of that show, and people kind of got it in their minds that he's like this versatile actor. And I saw him in the Ridley Scott Moses picture, which, you know, that movie is bad, but he's terrible in it too. I mean, I think he suffered from having his role cut down a whole bunch, I think, but it was just like, he's one of those guys where it's like two things that are like kind of almost getting close to deal breaker with me is like, if he shows up in something or if Damon Lindelof writes something, it's like, ugh.
Your buddy.
Yeah. It's like, that's the when I will be ranting. I'll have to create my own podcast just as not to sully the waters of me with me complaining.
Well, so speaking of writing, so this also came up with regards to The Force Awakens and some other stuff. So Simon Kinberg did another interview for Entertainment Weekly about a bunch of stuff, but he was asked a little bit about his involvement in the process of writing these for The Force Awakens, but the movies generally. And he compared, at least, so he mentioned Michael Arndt, who hasn't worked on the movie in a while. So at least the early days, he compared it more to like a TV writer's room where there would be like a big whiteboard up and him and Michael Arndt and someone else who's I'm blanking on, who I'm sure is very important. Whoever else wrote Force Awakens, right? They would have this big whiteboard and they would each have like their own notes and they would just write all over this whiteboard, not only for The Force Awakens, but also sort of for where they saw the story going for episodes 8 and 9. And then later on, he said he helped, so he was there to help break the story. And I guess Kinberg, he works on Rebels and he does some other stuff, but this was probably in his capacity as like the Lucasfilm story group attaché to the movies. So, he said he helped break the story. He gave script notes on all the different drafts. Right. So it just made me think that when you think of it more like a TV writer's room, like the old saw is, right, that you're like a comedy writer and someone comes up to you and says like, oh, I love that joke. Your name is on a particular episode. And of course someone's favorite joke from that episode is something that someone else wrote. Right. That's like the old, you hear comedy writers talk about that all the time. So, I mean, it was just making me think about, given how much of like a group process this was, like and I don't even know why this is necessarily important, but it's just something I was thinking about, like in terms of giving credit, I guess it's like, if the movie is really good or if it's bad, like who do we give credit to or blame, right? It's going to be harder to tease out who's responsible for like, well, the script wasn't good. Well, so was that Kinberg, and does that mean Kinberg shouldn't work on these anymore, or is that like Michael Arndt's contribution, or Kasdan, or J.J. Abrams coming in at the last minute with an idea? I guess internally they'll sort of know, and so we might get hints of like, if a movie doesn't do well, and then that person, notice them not working on any of the future projects, like maybe that was a clue. But I mean, the other thing that I would think would be important is for people like Rian Johnson or whomever they get. I can't even remember. I know Colin Trevorrow is rumored to be directing it, but I don't even remember who's writing episode 9. But right, whoever comes in at the end, like how much of this stuff is already going to be laid out for them, and how much input are they going to be able to have? Because I would think that would be important for a writer and a directors come into these things expecting like, I'm going to have some script input. But if, this group of like 6 people has already mapped out like all of the story beats and, all right, well, because this happened in Force Awakens, now this other thing has to happen in episode 9. Like if you're coming into that, how much freedom are you going to expect to have? And how much are you as a director going to be allowed to change within the overall parameters that other people have set out? It's not, I mean, there's not like a ton to say about it. It's just like an interesting, that's kind of an interesting problem that might arise.
Yeah. It's that idea where, Lucas was, he always claimed that he had a surplus of story to tell.
Right.
And then really you might end up finding that like, oh, well, the reasons Rian Johnson signed on, one of the big reasons is getting like, something is being taken away. Like, oh, cause we haven't touched on it, but they are doing some reshoots and possibly in Ireland.
Yeah. I was going to get to that. Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, we changed this whole thing. And so now this character is dead and you can't, it's like, oh, half my script had this character in it. It's like, well, sorry,
right.
Ryan.
Right.
So
And yeah, I mean, my impression is that I've gotten is that Ryan Johnson is like off on his own, like writing this script, or at least a couple drafts of the script himself. But I don't know. I mean, I guess whenever episode 8 comes out, we'll hear more about Kinberg saying like, "Oh yeah, I gave script notes on that one too," or someone else.
Yeah, I think he's I think Ryan Johnson's in pre-production in England right now.
Yeah,
because I saw.
But I mean, the impression I got was like, okay, we're going to give episode 7 to J.J. Abrams, and then we're going to give episode 8 to Ryan Johnson to like go off and make whatever he wants to make with this story. But maybe that sounds like that's not really going to be the case.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because at this stage, we don't really even know who this is gonna. It's like we're all excited, but we're thinking like, oh, John Boyega and Daisy Ridley and all these people, but we might turn out might not like their take on it,
Right.
And then if this is kind of like the soft goodbye for our, classic characters, if like, oh, well, Han's in it or not in it, or brief cameo, or they're going to do the slow thing where it's like, well, their involvement's going to be less and less each movie, or not at all. Then it's like, wow, the weight of this is really going on a lot of unknown variables at this point.
Right.
Writer, director wise, and acting wise.
Right. I mean, at least for the prequels, you could sort of tell, like, all right, this is on Lucas. Right. Whereas, these new movies, and I'm a little more concerned about the anthology films than I am with the episodes, but, if they just make a hash of things, like, what do you do? Like, as a fan, like, what do you do with that? Like, that, if episode 7, if you're like, wow, that was kind of a mess, and then you see like, oh, Simon Kinberg is now writing this other movie, do you get excited? Do you not get excited? Like, what kind of expectations are you supposed to have for this thing? Or conversely, like, if episode 7 is great, and then they're like, oh, Simon Kinberg is writing this other thing, and you're like, oh, okay, that might be good, but I don't really know how much of that, what I liked about episode 7 was him or not, and so I don't know how excited I'm supposed to be. I mean, and the answer for Disney and Lucasfilm, of course, is that you're supposed to be excited about all of it. Exactly. That none of this is supposed to matter, really. This is like, who cares? This is inside baseball. There's like this overarching plan, and we're just supposed to be excited about Star Wars and be grateful that we're getting Star Wars every year for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, it's that idea where it's like, oh, we'll just, even if it's not the greatest thing ever, it's like, we're going to, episode 7 will be so great on inertia. It's really 8. We have to sell them because if we're selling them 8 and 9 simultaneously, right. It's like, I don't know. Just a quick diversion. It's like about 6 months ago, I think, before we even hatched this podcast, I had a very vivid dream that I went to a movie theater and watched this movie, and it was the worst piece of shit I'd ever seen.
Oh,
it was like this thing where it was just like, it was almost like it was all these kind of dumb things like they had never tried before. Like, they shrunk the Millennium Falcon down and it was inside of somebody or something. It was like, I mean, it's a dream. It's a dream logic. It's just like, This is so bad. And like they cut their hair funny or something. It's, Speaking of that, I keep on meaning to mention this, is that, we have still never really seen, we saw Carrie Fisher in the behind the scene thing. We saw Chewie. We've seen Han. We've never really seen Luke in costume yet.
Right. We've seen the beard, and everyone's assumed that the beard is for the movie. But...
Right. And there was like there's 2 periods of that too. It's like, Luke, he had the beard, and then he had a crazy beard.
Right.
Which happens fast, being a bearded fellow. I would say my beard is pretty, for being a guy who's only 42, I have the 62-year-old Mark Hamill beard right now. Unfortunately, it's more the gray than anything. But it does go from being like, oh, that looks nice, to being like, homeless guy pretty quick. It's like a couple days of non-maintenance and sleeping on it funny. Right. But he has regrown his beard, and because he had it at Celebration, which makes me think that these scenes that they're doing in Ireland are Luke-centric scenes. That maybe they went
that could be.
They did a rough assembly and said, "Hey, there's not enough Luke in this or something." Which is my big feeling is that they're teasing it because there's not like Luke is not even going to show up until like the last third of the movie or something. It's kind of my thing, and it's like they haven't really been playing. You know, Hamill's been pretty mum, which contractually has to be mum,
right?
But yeah, he's the only guy we haven't seen what he looks like. Unless we assume that's his hand reaching out, which you had said might not be. You said you had a theory that it wasn't.
No, I think I can't remember where I read this, but there is allegedly some other character that also had like a mechanical hand in this movie. I might have made that up. No, that might have been a dream I had.
No, there has been. I mean, I guess you might want to skip ahead 30 seconds if you don't want to be spoiled, listener. 3, 2, 1. Spoiler. There was a lot of talk that early sketches at Chewbacca had a mechanical hand. That sometime in the interim that he had lost an arm and thing. And that being said, he could be wearing some kind of thing over his hand, or he loses it later in the movie, and that's they're raising the stakes. Chewbacca loses.
I think even if that's true, I doubt that would be him in the cloak, like putting his hand on.
No, not at all.
But yeah,
I mean, everything has come to pass. I mean, they said in the trailer we theorized, is that Leia, and it turned out to be Leia, and so I think that was Luke. But we've never seen him full on, I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, we saw Han Solo in the trailer, so we know what he's wearing. We've seen the costume. We saw Leia in the behind the scenes video, which is in her costume. But you're right. We haven't at least seen Mark Hamill's face in anything where he's wearing his Luke outfit. His Luke drag.
Yeah.
Although I think he's you can kind of see. I'm sorry. I'm not going to go off.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying. You do see his arm, and he is wearing some kind of tan long sleeve, and it comes up from underneath of his cloak. So he's might be wearing a fitted Jedi Obi-Wan Kenobi type smock, but with a black cloak. That's just my theory.
Yeah. No, that's a pretty good theory, I think. So we had some other stuff to talk about. I want to get to the Star Wars issue 7, the standalone Obi-Wan Kenobi story, but there was some video game news. Did you want to touch on that? I don't really have a whole lot to say about it.
Yeah, no, it's just
you're more on the video game side than I am.
Yeah, well, you had said that they have added a single player mode
to Battlefront.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people were complaining about like, hey, if this thing doesn't have online, it's not going to be useful. Either I don't have good internet, which I pity anyone that's trying to play a modern console without a good internet speed, because every time you install it, there's at least a 5 gig update patch for it. Yeah, you can play. Oh, you can only play as a Rebel, but you can play as Rebel Imperial multiplayer. And then they just announced there's going to be like a fighter squadron mode, which I assume is that's like a 20 play. Is that a 20 on 20?
Well, so I think there are two. There's a 10 on 10 mode, and then there's a 20 on 20 mode. And I can't remember which one it is, but in one of them you can even fly the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah, that one, I saw a trailer for
the
that.
fighter squadron mode, I think, is mostly like X-wings versus TIE fighters.
And I think it's more of an arcade feel. It's not the updated X-wing versus TIE fighter that some people are really hoping for, which I think would be a great thing that they should develop. But now this seems more of kind of like the old Nintendo Rogue Squadron type battle, where it's kind of arcadey and fast paced and not a lot of customization. I'm excited. I've been waiting for that game for years, so I'm definitely going to buy that. It's one of those things where I'm just weighing what's the best exclusive. Where should I'm in that Best Buy program where you get 20% off of everything. But if something else comes up, I don't want to miss out on something. Usually I'm the first person to call bullshit on like pre-order exclusives for games. And like, if you buy Arkham Knight, which was the newest Batman game, had, if you'd have to buy it 5 different ways to get all the add-ons or something, and then it turned out the game was not as as people have had it for a month or so, they're not as enjoying it as much as they did at first blush. I really, I really hope this is not going to be one of those scenarios, because I'm actually thinking about buying it for both consoles to try it out, which is something I never do. But there are some exclusives, and one console will have access to the Jakku map before the other, and I'm kind of looking for that Venn diagram of when somebody's going to say, this is, if you want to, most bang for your buck, this is where you want to buy it. So I'm eagerly anticipating, and it's like so far away. And I'm, it's part of my personal philosophy now, not to try to rush life past by like, oh, I can't wait for November, and enjoy every day. But part of me is like, can't we just have it now? Because I don't really have anything it's like, I would like to be playing this game for for the next 4 months, but I don't know.
Right.
It's one of those things where I know it's going to be the scenario where I'm very judicious about how much time I spend playing video games. I talk about them a lot here, but I'm not really a mutual friend of ours said one thing. It's like, I would like to be, I'm paraphrasing. It's like, I'd like to be good at, there's a lot of things in this world I'd like to be good at, and playing video games is not one of them. It's just something, and it's just something that, that's a philosophy I have too. It's like, it's a way to relax. I'm not a competitive person by nature. So I know that there's going to be dudes that are going to have it preloaded on their console, and and so by the first week, you'll be going into these matches just getting your ass handed to you. And unless you really want to work, woodshed for hours and hours and hours, it's like, I don't know. That's part of the thing where I'm glad that there is going to be some single player, because like multiplayer can, even beyond the whole online harassment, which, I've had only limited experience with, the whole idea of getting guys that are just like, they don't feel bad about spending 10 hours or 12 hours a day, just, hammering away, trying to get achievements and stuff like that. And if, if the servers aren't balanced properly, you're not going to have a good time.
Right.
I watched the developer video for the other big Star Wars game, which was Uprising, which is...
Yes. So we got a teaser trailer and then something called like a developer diary, which is just the people who work on the game talking about how excited they are to work on the game.
Yeah, it's a 3...
With some additional footage from the game.
Yeah, they're in alpha. Isn't that what they said? Alpha is usually... Yeah. Alpha is pretty early in development. I mean, it goes alpha, and I think it just goes to alpha, beta, and then when something goes gold, that means that they've shipped the final code to the manufacturing place. But for something like this, which isn't going to have a physical copy because it's an iPad game or an iPhone game, it's like, I don't know. It's a Diablo style RPG, which means you're kind of looking at it down at your everything from a 45-degree angle. It's a lot of just kind of going through rooms, clearing rooms of enemies. Shooting stuff. Yeah, shooting stuff.
Because I watched it too, and all the footage was just like people shooting things, like shooting stormtroopers or whatever.
It's that kind of RPG, which there's probably not going to be a lot of... Most of the story decisions will be probably taking place in either events that are probably downloaded in updates, like, Tapped Out. Simpsons Tapped Out has a... seasonal downloads, and I'm sure that's the way that they'll be you'll be downloading, like, oh, this is the expansion, the Empire expansion. Or I'm not super excited about this one. I mean, their little developer diary just sounded like every other, guy, like, Star Wars has been my favorite thing since I was a kid. It's such an honor. It's like such an experience. I mean, I've been sold that bill of good on Star Wars games so many times. I mean, I'm the kid that bought, Jedi saber battles for the Atari 2600, which is the worst game ever because the lightsabers never touch each other, and it's this ridiculous.
Wow.
And they said, "Oh,
but then you don't get the cool like crashing together noise."
Yeah, it's basically, the game was, there was a remote, the thing that Luke gets shot in the ass. In the center of the screen that moves, and you control how it shoots to your opponent. So it's like you have a paddle, so you swing your.
So it's Pong.
Yeah, it was Pong.
Yeah.
It's Pong with a stick, and your stick is you're doing a 180-degree swing. You can't move your character. The other person, your opponent's on the other side, and your point is to try to shoot them with the laser beam and break down I think it was to break down their shield over time, and and you try to block it. It's like we thought it was the best thing ever for when we had it, but it was a piece of garbage. And these mobile games, it's like you have to, there's. I
am a little curious. So do you remember when Uprising is supposed to come out? Have they said?
I do not know. No.
All right. I'm sure we've said it on a previous.
If it's in alpha, then we're talking. It probably won't be out till maybe next year. Oh, well, mobile games probably have a shorter development cycle because the idea of updates are kind of built into them. So maybe I'm thinking maybe it'll be around the same time. Maybe it'll be in the fall.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing is, like you said, right, they can do updates to the story or whatever. I mean, there is like a real storyline behind this one. They've written, this is there's some system that still hasn't heard that the Emperor and Darth Vader are dead, so they're still carrying on as if nothing changed, and all this other thing. And so you and your team have to try to fight the Empire, even though the Empire's dead, or really dead, or whatever. So they develop these characters, and they're the plague troopers, and there's General this guy or whatever. So I am curious whether we're going to get a tie-in novel, at least one tie-in novel for this, which might be interesting. I mean, the novels that we've gotten so far, I think, have missed more than they've hit. But I also realize it, and I acknowledge that most of the novels that are quote unquote now the new canon, those were novels that they had in the works before they made that decision to sweep everything away. So in a lot of ways, they're still sort of the old regime of, developing these stories and, pitching them and getting someone to work on the manuscript. Really the only ones I would say that count as new are A New Dawn, because that was a tie into Rebels. And that might be it, because I think all of the others were already sort of in the works before they swept the EU away and said, okay, well, we're going to start over now. I mean the Dark Disciple, which just came out. Yeah. Tarkin and Tarkin and the Lords of the Sith and the Skywalker one were definitely in the works before they sort of started over. And I mean, Dark Disciple is just basically 6 scripts for the Clone Wars put into a novel. So that's, you would imagine that's probably been in the works for a little while. Right. Even if not, I still sort of consider that kind of an older idea. So we still haven't really gotten a sense of what kind of the new regime, the new book publishing regime is going to be like. And we'll get that when we get to Aftermath, but I think this would be an opportunity for them to sort of add another book and maybe flesh out the story, flesh out the characters from this game a little bit more, the way they've done. We mentioned the Karen Travis novels earlier, and some of the other video games they've done that with as well. So I don't know. I mean, if I might read that book, but the other books would have to start improving in quality in order for me to really consider that, I think. Yeah,
and I've already kind of heard some. Now, I'm basically, my source is another Star Wars podcast. So, Rebel Force Radio. So I was listening to it last night. They kind of rightly said that they're all kind of real soft on this Aftermath, because it's starting to feel more and more that it's a Wedge kind of centric, and it's really we're not it's not what we think that we're getting. It's like if Luke, that post Return of the Jedi Luke, Leia, Han thing that we were expecting is probably not going to be the main focus of the book. It might have a much smaller or side, a scope.
Here's why Wedge isn't in the movies.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, well, so maybe that's the thing. They're just really they're really going to tease this idea that, we're not going to know where these guys have been, what's been going on with them until we see that crawl, you know.
Yeah.
There's been some implication that, you know, Luke is in hiding for some reason because of some event that happened. Right. And it's like, I've been trying to avoid spoilers on that, but it's one of those things where it's like, well, maybe that's this byproduct that, you know, this thing that's gonna, you know, either this is the thing that's supposed to, that I've talked about in the past. It's like, oh, this thing that's supposed to be in A Force Awakens that fundamentally reframes the entire saga that I've heard hinted at is part of the reason that, like, well, we're not going to hear any of this stuff. We're not, you know, I mean, in some ways it's good, but in some ways we're so chomping at the bit for just a little bit. Like these stories, these post A New Hope stories, it's like, they're always like, yeah, eventually you guys are going to end up in Hoth and blah, blah, blah. You know, they don't have a lot of weight. If anything, they're doing the opposite. They're removing the mystery, people are meeting in places that we didn't expect, and they're not meeting in ways that I feel give gravitas to their later interactions. And like I said, I had already committed to reading this Aftermath, but the more I hear about it, the more I'm kind of like, oh, it's just going to be like another kind of, you know, they're going to have a bunch of characters I don't care about that have, you know, either they're going to die on the last page or they're going to be obscure and it's not going to matter.
Right. And we've already talked about, at least in the preview we got, like we looked at the writing and we're like, yeah, it's okay. So if it's not super well written, like, which is the other attraction, right? Like as with these Karen Traviss novels.
Yeah, it's like third person.
This is like the first time I've ever really cared about the Clone Wars because they're pretty well written. So if it's something where it's like, I didn't really need a trilogy of books to update me on what Wedge has really been doing, quote unquote, really been doing.
Right.
And if the writing turns me on, like, I'm not gonna.
Yeah, there's been some controversy because it's the third person present tense or something that is not a great way to write, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I mean, you briefly mentioned the comics, so let's get to issue 7, which is funny. We were like, oh, we're gonna have a short show this week, and here we are.
Yeah.
So Star Wars issue number 7, this is a standalone Obi-Wan Kenobi story. So previously in the Star Wars comic, Luke goes to Ben's old hut, whatever it's called, and he finds this journal that was meant for him. And so this is the first entry, or one of the entries in that journal. So it's a flashback, and it's a flashback to not right after Luke was born, but Luke isn't that old. He's probably like 6, maybe.
Yeah, 6
I couldn't tell how old he was supposed to be. 6 or 7. And so Obi-Wan Kenobi is sort of trying to balance being a hermit and trying to stay anonymous on this planet and in this town versus also trying to keep Luke out of trouble, but then also his sort of his higher calling as a Jedi to protect everyone and keep the people of Tatooine safe more generally. So what did you think of it, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like I feel like it's, even though I can't really think of a scenario where this is depicted, it feels kind of like territory we've already covered.
Yeah.
But I can't tell you where I've seen it before, though.
I mean, Kenobi, because Luke, like in the Kenobi novel that's now not canon anymore, but it touched on some of the same issues of like Kenobi trying to be anonymous, but also trying to help people. But he was one of several characters. Like he wasn't, I don't even think he was like a major character in that book. And, certainly to the extent that Luke Skywalker was in it, Obi-Wan Kenobi would just say like, oh, and then he would just think to himself like, oh, I need to make sure Luke's okay. But that was it. Like you never saw him or anything. So, and I don't know if we've even seen this in Star Wars before, but yeah, the whole story itself to me felt a little like, yeah, I've seen this somewhere before. Like this is an idea that they're importing from somewhere else and they're just telling this in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing it kind of touches on, it's like, it starts to make me, it's the whole idea, again, about, sometimes Star Wars' concepts do not hold up to scrutiny. But then you start thinking about, like, God, what would it be like to be, and you're like 40-year-old person, you're supposed to be in the prime of your life, and you were a warrior, and now you're just kind of stuck in the middle of nowhere with nothing. I mean, how do you fill your day? Is it just like quiet meditation and all this stuff? I mean, we don't see him talking to, Qui-Gon. He talks to Qui-Gon, but he talks to him almost as a non-entity, as a like, well, this is what he would say, and so we don't know if he still hasn't quite figured out the whole forced disappearance thing, which I don't really want to know how that works, because it's like, it seems like every time Lucas ever tried to, he kind of botched it. So it's I think it's better to keep it as a mystery. But yeah, I mean, that really what I took away from it is just how sad of a life that man had in the middle of nowhere. And it's like, you can't do anything. It's like, you can't help people. You can't make them, like, he tries, like, there's this thing where he tries to, going back to my comment about Jawa juice, he found some kind of fungus or something, or a cactus. And during the drought, there's at this point, there's a very, a desert planet with a drought, which, isn't that by nature what a desert is, but he's trying to instruct people on ways of being able to, like, find moisture in these kind of weird, mushrooms or something that the sand people eat. And people kind of just tell him to go F himself. And so he finds out, like, no matter, he can't be a warrior. He can't even offer people counsel, because they don't want to, they don't know who he is, and they don't, without the badge, they don't respect him, so to speak.
Right. I mean, I thought Kenobi also came across as a little Batman-y in this issue. Yeah. Cause he, there was where he, like, uses the Force to, like, lift the bad guys up in the air and, like, throw them aside. Like, that was very much an echo to me of Batman Begins, in that scene where at the docks or whatever.
It's almost like he's a little bit more like Rorschach from The Watchmen. It's like, Kenobi's journal, page 1. I saw a dead Jawa in a gutter today. Its eyeball poking out. I did nothing. Tatooine is a cancerous sore waiting to burst. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's all right. I mean, the other thing we're missing so far is any kind of interaction between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Owen Lars that would add some meat to the conversations that Owen and Luke have in A New Hope. I mean, you've talked about how the comics have sort of detracted, I guess, from the meetings, the events that happen in the original trilogy films. But I think this is a case where, when Owen is talking to Luke about Ben Kenobi, like, he clearly has met this guy and, like, doesn't like him and doesn't trust him, or at least wants to keep Luke from that life. But we still, maybe this will come later, because they left it open for the possibility of future similar standalone issues, which will probably depend on, like, reader response and sales, which I would imagine this issue probably did pretty well. But maybe that'll come later, where we'll get to see, Ben Kenobi and Owen Lars arguing over what to do with Luke, or even, like, how much of a presence he should be in Luke's life.
He did say, like, there's a comment where Kenobi says, like, oh, I should be training him, but his uncle won't allow it. So there's already been some kind of issue, which to me is like, it has to be that way for the story to work. But it almost seems like there needs to be, like, more of a compelling reason when a man that has the power to, like, just come and go, I will train Luke today, and put his hand in front of him, and he could be like, and you're going to make me an egg salad sandwich and shut up. He could do that because if Jedis are, the path of least resistance, and if it's the means to an end, they have to kind of bend the rules a little bit. It's shown that they do it. So I think they have to, show that dichotomy. Like, why isn't Kenobi going in full bore? It's like, maybe he should think it was a bad idea. Maybe it's like, well, I'm not going to teach him because this is not a life, why teach him to be a Jedi when there's only going to be one Jedi? I'm
Right.
getting old.
Right. Yeah. I will say the first time I read through it, I thought the artwork was just okay, but I came to like it a little more as I looked at it more deeply and everything. I mean, there's an Art Nouveau quality, I think, to the artwork, which is something that they used for Naboo in episode, particularly the underwater scenes in Naboo in episode 1. And I don't know if that was a conscious decision on their part. I'm guessing it's probably not, because this is a desert planet and that was like underwater. But I kind of once I figured that out, I was like, okay, I kind of get, they're going for a particular look, a particular style here, and yeah, it works okay. But I don't know. What did you think of the artwork? I mean, we've talked about the story and everything.
Well, I mean, I wasn't super into it. It's the cover. It's like they're trying to mold that McGregor face with
Right.
And that's fine. I mean, people age. I mean, that you can look one way when you're 30 and look completely different when you're 60. It's like, diet and stuff like that. So but they did kind of make his face
the harsh Tatooine sandstorms.
I don't know. It was like maybe they tried a little too hard. I guess I wasn't really wowed by the art. Even I actually, like I said, I preferred the Lando one, even with the many faces of Lando, which they never seem to ever get a good depiction and
settle on.
Yeah, this was kind of like, I don't know. It seemed a little messy or it didn't really impress anything great on me. Sometimes I actually had trouble figuring out exactly who I was looking at a few times. So that's always kind of one of those situations where it's like when I find myself going like, hey, I don't understand. What am I looking at here? Then I'm like, well, that's not my fault. It's the art. Now, one of these bounty hunter or underling types for Jabba or whatever his collection is. Are we supposed to think that that's Forlom in the back?
Oh, I don't know. My guess was that it was just another similar droid.
I see.
Right? Like, there, in the Darth Vader comic, we got an IG-90, that sort of on the same line as IG-88 from Empire Strikes Back. So I just assumed this was, 5 LOM or 2 LOM or, something like that. But maybe it could be 4 LOM, I guess. He needed to come from somewhere. Maybe he was working on Tatooine for a while.
And I'm directly looking at this comic. It's like one thing I did notice, I really hated the characterization of Luke.
Yeah.
That kind of that smirky thing when he's getting harassed by one of these mob guys. And it's like, I'm not afraid of you. And that kind of like defiant look. It just, I don't know. It came off more of a snotty kid than
Right.
I mean, I don't like the idea that Luke was, he had this posture or whatever, kind of like that he was. We basically everything to the contrary, shown that he's basically was kind of a weenie, and what happened?
Yeah, I mean, he certainly had a lot of confidence in his flying abilities,
right?
Right, because when they get to Yavin 4, and he's like, "Oh, I did that. I used to bullseye womp rats in my T-16 back home. That can't be any bigger than that. I can do that."
I guess there is.
So he definitely had that confidence, but yeah, in general, when I was going to Tachi Station to pick up some power converter.
Yeah, it was, he had that callow youth thing, and I mean, yeah, Empire, the hubris is in full effect of his, like, I know how I'm ready and all this stuff, and I got my, half my training and took off, and I don't know. I guess I just didn't care for this story or the characterization that much. I knew exactly what was going to happen.
Yeah. So you mentioned the art of trying to merge Alec Guinness and Ewan McGregor. And there was an interesting. So I don't usually read the viewer mail section, so I don't even know why this caught my eye, but it did. They were actually asked specifically about that. Like, so how old is he here? And how old is Alec Guinness supposed to be in A New Hope? And this is like the editor or whoever's in charge of the Star Wars stuff for Marvel. And he said, so he went back and, based on that question, he went back and watched the movies again. And he said, or he went to IMDb, I guess, to look and see how old Ewan McGregor was. And he was like, well, if Ewan McGregor was playing just a little bit older than his actual age in episode 3, then the ages just about work. But he never said like how much older Ewan McGregor is supposed to be playing. And even then it's still like, well, it sort of works. So yeah, I mean, I get why I do and I don't get why Lucas did that. Went with a younger actor. I mean, originally it wasn't supposed to be. Originally, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn were just one character, and it was just Obi-Wan Kenobi. So, he could have been like Qui-Gon's age, I think, originally, but then he decided to make him younger. But yeah, it kind of, from now on, I think everyone who deals with that character is going to have to answer that question now.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because I
feel like they should just nail down like one stock answer, right? The story group should just be like, all right, here is the answer when you're asked this question, and then
it's the old problem of like when the first movie first came out and people realized that a parsec was a unit of distance and not a unit of time or whatever, and people are like, oh god, this guy doesn't even know science or whatever. Part of me is like, whatever, just get over it and kind of just enjoy it for what it is, and the other half of me is like, well, these are the threads of a poorly written script that we're still dealing with. It's like, right, it's like you can
only say like, well, who cares, so many times.
They could have fixed it so easily by having, they wouldn't even have had to have recast. They could have had Qui-Gon Jinn, and they could have thrown a wispy goatee on Ewan McGregor and grown his hair out. Instead of being, Padawan and Master, they could have just been 2 Jedi Knights. And, Qui-Gon was, Qui-Gon had a Padawan who had died. And when he runs into Anakin Skywalker, who should be probably about 15, if we wanted to make it right, he would see him and go, oh, I lost my Padawan when he was 15. This time I'm gonna do it right. And he brings a guy who's not, ready to be, or probably shouldn't be a Jedi, into the fold, and then it unfolds. He's inappropriate with his, with the Queen. He wants to date her. He wants to be close to her. I mean, they could have made it more human, and they could have easily, not had they probably would have had a shitty 15-year-old actor instead of a shitty 10-year-old actor. But,
right.
It's the idea that, the original trilogy has the uncomfortableness threads of the fact that Lucas didn't really realize what he was going to do with Leia and Luke's relationship until he had scripted out the third movie. And it's the same issue where it's like, the age problems of everybody in the prequels.
Right. The other interesting bit in the reader mail section was about the fight between Boba Fett and Luke, which I know is one of your big complaints. So I haven't gone back to look, but I somehow either forgot or just never picked up that Luke was blinded in that fight, like he couldn't see.
Yeah, and now that
did you ever pick up on that?
Now that you bring it up, I do remember that, but I thought he saw him and then got blinded. I mean, I thought he saw him at least once, but maybe I don't have.
Well, so anyway,
the comics handy.
The editor said that was the way that they could preserve the uniqueness of the meeting between Boba Fett and Luke on Bespin, so that because Luke fought Boba Fett, but he didn't know he was fighting Boba Fett. He didn't know who that guy was. He just thought he was fighting someone. So then, when he sees Boba Fett on Bespin, that's the first time he's seen Boba Fett, which that's so cheap. I think that's like a Three's Company construct. It's like, oh well,
right.
Right. He accidentally squirted lemon juice in his eyes, so he couldn't see, and that's why he didn't know that Jack was really playing both people, and that he was just pitching his voice different. You know, it's
exactly. It's
I don't like. I know they have to do that kind of stuff because it's comic books, right?
They do it. They do.
I'm
it
asking
all the
comic
time.
books to be less comic booky.
They do it all the time because the Clone Wars has that issue where basically in the first 15 minutes of Revenge of the Sith, it's established that General Grievous and Anakin Skywalker have never met. And
right.
And so the whole run of the Clone Wars, they could never have Grievous and Anakin Skywalker ever interact with each other. So they always had to come up with, convenient ways. And then they fudged it again, when Dooku and Kenobi and Skywalker have that final battle. In the dialogue, it implicates that somehow this is the first time they've faced each other since Anakin lost his arm. But then later in Clone Wars, they've had them interact. It's I think they've even fought a few times.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's one time that like, well, we're just going to kind of shift this a little bit. And another thing when they go so far out of the way, like squirting lemon juice in his eyes or whatever. To me, that's a bad way of dealing with it. Yeah.
But again, like I said, I'm asking comic books to be less comic booky, and I think it's part my lack of exposure really to the medium that I'm asking things of these comic books that probably aren't fair. But at the same time, it's like if they are pitching this as like, okay, everything is canon and everything's connected, and we're these match up to the movies, and it's like, well, but then they need to match up with the movies. Like there's only so much like crazy comic booky, nonsense that you can throw in before then, as you've been saying, before then you watch the movies and go like, what, how does that work then?
Yeah. If they're going to pay this story group all this money, then make them work for it. Figure out some good concrete ways of doing it, so they don't have to fudge it. I mean, I'd never read the letter pages either, just mainly because it's like that's my long history of not reading the letter pages in Star Wars comics, just because it's annoying. I don't really care what other. I don't really generally.
I mean, it's mostly people saying like, "Oh my god, I'm so happy. I was worried, but now these are so amazing, and I love them, and thank you." Right? Yeah. That's basically mostly what it is.
But I think that's kind of why I have a thing where I don't read a lot of comics either, because I always feel at the end of the day, I'm only people that really know comics, like the real comic people. It's a whole package. It's the art, it's the pacing, it's the use of the physics of the image. For me, it's about I want story. I want a good story, and I want it's all right if I want it to look good. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
but if the story's not there, it's all I can't just fall back on the fact, well, the art was beautiful, but I hate the story. Yeah. And comics is a lot of that thing where it's like, it's never the humors are never in perfect balance. It's always like, you got to have a little too much of this. And to me, that's why I always find out that like, comic books are, they're an imperfect format, because then you can always get in the economics of them and how long it takes them to come out and things like that too.
Right.
But we were waiting for this issue for I think almost 2 months. I think there was kind of a weird gap, because we got the big reveal that Han has a wife. So now by the time we get onto that, it's going to be 3 months of a cliffhanger. And for something that I think is really going to be basically an issue of semantics. Like, oh, we got married because we couldn't share a hotel on this planet. Unmarried couples couldn't share a room, so we got married.
There was no room at the inn for this unmarried couple.
It's like that, some kind of weird conceit that'll be explained in about 5 minutes. And for 3 months, we've been hanging. And that's why I don't like comic books in some respect. It pisses me off that they're still doing this. It's like, you guys fucked me when I was 10, and now 30 some odd years later, you're still fucking me over with these cliffhangers.
Yeah.
But whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's a good note to wrap up on. But I will say, we're not going to do a show next week. I'm going to be out of town again. But also part of it is we've clearly have found enough time to fill up talking about Star Wars, but a lot of the news we've been getting is just like, well, rumors about with this character, like the rumors about Felicity Jones's character. I almost said Felicity Huffman. The rumors about Felicity Jones' character in Rogue One, or like, oh, here's the video game developers talking about Uprising, right? It's just like tiny little stuff, and so we're going to take a break for a week. So we invite our listeners to please go back and listen through the shows, catch up if you are just now joining us, or if you've just recently joined us, you can go back and catch up on the show. But there is also this thing that got posted on io9.com today. That it's the title of it is "We're Facing Star Wars Overload and It Scares the Crap Out of Me." So if you just Google like IO9 Star Wars Overload, you'll find it. And like, I have no connection to them. I just saw this, and the reason I'm recommending it is because it touches on a lot of stuff that we have, that Robert and we have talked about over the last 13 episodes now, right? The fact that we're getting a movie every year from now until 2019, and which means we're going to get 4 or 5 different promotional barrages between now and 2019, and then there's all the comics and the TV, right? All of this stuff that's, it can get overwhelming if you are the kind of person who wants to consume all of it. And of course, they're encouraging everyone to like consume all of this stuff, and because this is canon now, and you have to pay attention to everything. So it's just sort of the authors talking through sort of their feelings about that, and then also maybe this means that Star Wars is now for younger folks who can sort of grow up and age their way through this new era of Star Wars. And so what does that mean? Maybe he doesn't spend a lot of time on this, but maybe what does that mean for those of us who are maybe Robert and I's age, or at my age? It touches on a lot of really interesting stuff that we have talked about on the show, and I think it's a nice companion piece to Talking Bird, the special edition, at least the last 13 episodes. So
yeah,
so go look for that.
I think that's good. A good way to kind of frame what a lot of the stuff we talk about. You were talking about the delineation between our first 12 episodes and now our 13. So I guess we've done 25 episodes. But the first 12, if you're new to this, we were a very different show. Well, not really. Yeah. We weren't really that different.
The format was very much the same.
Very, very the same. But we were talking about a show, which you might not be
Bird.
We're just talking real. Just talking Bird. And we were talking about the 3rd season of Adult Swim from the Cartoon Network's show starring Chris Elliott called EAGLEHEART. They did a
the Bird.
They did a 10 episode run called Paradise Rising. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty much the best you can get in televised comedy.
It's so good. And I still think about it all the time.
And it's on Hulu. It is. You don't have to pay any money.
The show is on Hulu.
It is worth checking out. If you're like, I like Robert and John, but I really don't like Star Wars. But you can still enjoy. You can go back those first. If you just want to get your foot wet, if you're an EAGLEHEART fan, episode 12, which is still on iTunes, we interview the creators, writers, directors, Jason Walliner, Andrew Weinberg, Michael Coman, about the totality of their show, and there's a lot of good conversation on there, and it's definitely worth. I mean, we still love that show just because we changed topics, just because they didn't keep doing a show. Also, you can interact with us online. We are, if you want to email us, it's talkingbirdcast@gmail.com. We're at talkingbirdcast on Twitter. We also have a show notes Tumblr that is at talkingbirdStarWars.tumblr.com. Also, if there's other avenues that you want to interact with us, let us know. I mean, if you guys want a voicemail system where you guys want to leave voicemails, It's
Do they still do that on Tumblr? Can you still call someone's Tumblr and leave them a message? Or
I don't
something?
know. I don't think so. I do have a Google Voice number that I don't quite know how it works. It would basically, I could have it be so there's a phone number for the show, and it would just, you could leave a voicemail for us, and we could play it on the show or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how we would do it necessarily, because now now that I've streamlined my recording thing, I don't have a mixing board anymore. But we could do it. I could do it at some point.
Yeah.
If that's something, if there's other avenues, we'd love to get this show out to more people. I'm not an expert on podcasting, so sometimes I feel that maybe since we set the show up in a different format, we're not getting a lot of crossover. It's like you put Star Wars in podcasts, we don't necessarily come up. We're listed under TV and film. I try to always put Star Wars in the description of the show so people might tag on it. I also know that there's other things other than iTunes. I mean, we're on Stitcher Radio. Mm-hmm. We're on the Libsyn, which is our main thing. If your guys are dedicated TuneIn apps, use TuneIn or Spotify, and that's something you would like the show on, let me know. Yeah. I don't really want to do it unless it's something that people are going to want to, because it's not really necessarily the place people go for podcasts. But if it's something like, hey, I'd much prefer a TuneIn experience or a Spotify experience, let us know, and I will make the effort to get it up there. But as of now, we're available in 3 spots: our Libsyn page, iTunes, Stitcher Radio.
Yeah, and Robert and I each have our own individual Twitter accounts. So Robert is at Congolia, Congolia. I am at Don't Be a Brick, which is spelled like those words are normally spelled. And we typically tweet out, stuff about the show and links to the show. So you can check us out there, and we talk about Star Wars and other things, and so if you want to retweet stuff or links to the show or whatever, that would be great.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Because we're out there, we're doing it for you. We're keeping the best Star
That's
Wars
right.
talk, the classiest Star Wars talk.
We do it for you.
And hey, we were talking about this before. Much like we do this show ad-free. We don't have
ad-free.
There's not a lot of podcasts these days that don't have commercials, and that's how I want to keep it. And I'm not threatening. I'm just saying, no,
right.
Tweet at us.
You're not saying, but you're saying.
I'm not threatening to add ads if you don't show us more love.
I'm just saying, it would be unfortunate if suddenly we were talking about Spacebox.com or whatever.
It would be, you got a nice cell phone plan there. It'd be too bad if all of a sudden you had to switch over to Ting.
Yeah.
Anyway, for Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
I remain John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in a couple weeks, and may the Force be with you.
Long before the wars, there was a man who walked among the stars. He knew the incredible power of the Force. He used it, he taught it, and died to preserve it for the good of all free worlds.